as you love, you will see me in the stars. As you look up at the stars, I will be there.
I'm Monica Charette, and this is Holding the Light.
As long as you love, I will whisper in your ear. Little whispers you will hear. As long as you love.
"11 years ago, Samantha Banerjee was pregnant with her first child, she lovingly named Alana. Nearing the end of a textbook pregnancy and just days away from meeting her baby girl, the unthinkable happened. Alana died from stillbirth. And thus began Samantha's empowering grief journey that has captured national attention through her tireless advocacy for stillbirth awareness and prevention. We never know where our grief will lead us. Today, Colby and I are honored to hold the light with Samantha Banerjee. Samantha, is such an honor, and it's a real privilege to have you on our podcast. So thank you so much for being here.
The privilege is all mine. Thank you both for having me on today.
Samantha joins us from New York, where she is raising two beautiful children and leading a very influential national movement called Push for Empowered Pregnancy, which we will get to. But it is the loss of your first child, Alana, to stillbirth that brings you here to our podcast. And let's start right there. We're so sorry for your loss.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So this experience has also put you on a very unexpected path in your life. Are you surprised yourself to be where you are today?
Absolutely. This is not the direction I could ever have imagined my life going, for sure. I have to say, like, looking back over the last 11 years, where I was 11 years ago today, I could never, ever, ever have imagined being where I am now.
Well, you were definitely on a different course. What did your life look like back in 2013?
So leading up to Alana's birth, my life was picture perfect. We had just gotten married a year earlier. We are from New York, New Jersey area originally, and we had moved out to Seattle after college for a few years, and then we moved back to the East Coast, which was a big upheaval and career change for both of us to make it work. But we knew we wanted to get married and start a family, and so we wanted to be close to our family. We had lived in New York City for a couple of years. We had just the most amazing wedding, just a little over a year before Alana's due date. And then we found our forever home up in the suburbs, moved up. We did a ton of renovations, and it was just like the culmination of everything. I had just published my second book, which was part of a trilogy, and it just felt like all of the pieces had fallen into place for us. And Alana was the first grandchild on both sides of our family. She just had a gaggle of adoring uncles and aunts and grandparents and cousins and friends. We were also one of the first of our friends to have kids. Yeah, everyone was just so excited for her arrival, and she was so anticipated and so loved. Yeah, and her entire pregnancy, we had been told everything was textbook. We were young, we were healthy, we're white, we live in a very privileged area where things are safe and secure, and we just followed all the doctor's orders. I did my 10-week birthing course. I read every book, blog, website I can get my hands on. She was the epitome of just everything, all of our dreams coming true. She was the last piece to fall into place, and we just could not wait for her to be here. I had an absolutely wonderful pregnancy. I was so happy. I had no negative symptoms, nothing to complain about. And then 2 days before her due date, we showed up at the hospital in labor, thinking we were finally bringing home a baby girl. only to be told that she no longer had a heartbeat. I just remember calling my parents. Of course, I'd been in labor, early labor, for about 24 hours at that point. So everyone knew that I was at the hospital and or getting ready to go to the hospital to deliver. So they're all waiting for the call to say the baby's here and we can come visit and meet her. And instead, we had to call everyone and tell them that she was gone. And I just remember my mom saying over and over, "That's impossible. That's impossible."
Because by all accounts, it was a low risk pregnancy, right?
Exactly. I mean, I was not an uneducated pregnant person. I thought I knew everything there was to know about pregnancy.
You read what to expect when you're expecting, right?
I read it cover to cover, the other ones as well. And I just never once through my entire pregnancy and even through my delivery heard the word stillbirth. And it wasn't honestly until I came home from the hospital after delivering her, and she was absolutely perfect. Obviously this was my first birth, and I had all these dreams about how beautiful it was going to be, and I was terrified. I was terrified going into the actual birth because I didn't know what to expect. I had no experience with death at that point. I think I could count on one hand the number of times I'd ever seen a dead body, and now I was giving birth to one, and to the person that I love most in the entire universe. I didn't know what to expect from it. At one point I remember while I was laboring, the nurses were kind of busy with something. I turned to my mom and I was just like, "Are they going to expect me to hold her?"
Oh my gosh.
My mom, thank God, was just like, "Yes, you want to hold her. You're going to want to hold her." And I'm so, so grateful. Those few minutes, hours that you get with your baby are precious because that's the only time you're ever going to get. And I was so surprised when she came out, and she was just beautiful. She was perfect. I mean, she looked like she was asleep. She was warm. She had her dad's long eyelashes and long, elegant fingers. She had his big feet that she'd been kicking with me the whole pregnancy. She was just absolutely perfect. You're just holding this perfect baby, and you're like, "Wake up. Like, why won't you wake?" And nobody could give us any answers at that point. And I found out later this is a really common thing because there was no obvious answers when she was born. In New York, at least, when a baby is born still, you don't get a birth certificate and you get a fetal death certificate. So it's basically everything all in one. I remember the day after I delivered her, the nurse coming in and asking me, to sign this paperwork. And there's a space there for mother. I need to sign the mother. And that was the first time I was referred to as a mother.
Right.
Signing her fetal death certificate is horrible.
Well, she did make you a mother.
She did make me a mother. Yes, she did. And but yeah, certainly not the way we ever pictured or imagined. And but what that certificate said was her cause of death was intrauterine fetal demise. And I went home and I'm like, "What is this?" I Googled it, and that was the first time I saw the word stillbirth through my entire pregnancy. Intrauterine fetal demise is literally just the medical term for stillbirth. Basically, her death certificate was useless. It said the cause of death was that she's dead.
They didn't communicate that with you at the hospital that she had died by stillbirth?
No, they never said the word stillbirth because there still is, and especially 11 years ago, such a stigma around that word that even in the midst of it happening, no one wanted to say it. So it wasn't until I got home and started just frantically digging for answers that I first came across that word and first learned how shockingly common stillbirth actually is.
And of course, stillbirth can be from multiple mechanisms of pregnancy.
Yeah.
In particular, what had happened to you and Alana in particular?
We literally don't have enough trained perinatal pathologists to investigate every stillbirth that happens. And for many families, it's not covered by insurance, not offered by the hospital. Many families are talked out of doing an autopsy, or just, that's the last thing you want to think about doing. We were lucky. Again, our insurance ended up covering almost everything. And I just was so desperate for answers that I was just like, I don't care what it costs. Like, we'll figure it out. Just do all the tests. I need to know what happened to her. Frustratingly, at the time, probably it took about 6 or 10 weeks, I think, for us to get the results back. So, we had to go through her whole funeral, telling everybody we know, with no explanation as to what had happened. And when it finally came back, what we were told was, well, there was nothing obviously wrong. So by a process of elimination, it must have been a cord accident, because we can't find anything else. And so for many years, that was what I thought it was. And it was described to me as an acute cord accident, meaning that, just at one point it got twisted or kinked or something. And, it was just like that long enough to cut off her oxygen and blood flow, and she died. It wasn't until about 6 years later, I was at a stillbirth conference, and I came into a session late, and the only space left was in the front row. Turned out I'm sitting next to one of the premier perinatal pathologists in the world, Dr. Harvey Kleiman at Yale University. And he asked me, do you know what caused your daughter's death? And I was just like, I'm 95% sure, because by that point, again, I had read every piece of research that was out there, trying to figure out, like, is this actually what happened? Going through another 2 pregnancies without having clear answers. I mean, it's terrifying, because I just didn't know if it was going to happen again. At that point, had felt like I was pretty confident in what had transpired, but Harvey had the service, and I, at that point, was already leading some advocacy stuff and in touch with a lot of other lost families, and I didn't want to recommend him to others without first paying him on myself. So I decided to go through the process with Yale, and Harvey was able to. So it turns out that after a stillbirth, most hospitals will by default send the placenta to pathology. The pathologist will, examine it, and they will often take like a small cutting of it and put it on a slide, and they keep those for at least 10 years. Some places, like Yale, for example, has ones that are over 100 years old. So Harvey's office was able to call my hospital 6 years later, request the slides. They went over, were sent to him at Yale, and he looked at them, and within a matter of days got back to me and said, she did die of a cord accident, but not the way you were told. I had found out in the intervening years that Alana had a particularly short, thin, hypocoiled, meaning it didn't have enough of the protective coiling umbilical cord. And so, like, my mom saw it in the delivery room, and she described it as looking like Christmas ribbon. So it just was prone to getting compressed or kinked, or it was not a good cord. That fit in with the symptoms that I experienced, with her movement slowing down towards the end as she got bigger, and her having a ton of hiccups. That's something that's still under research, but we see in a lot of cord accidents babies, is that they're having a ton of hiccups at the end of the pregnancy. And so I was fairly confident that, okay, it is what happened. And it is, but the difference is that this was not an acute cord accident. This was something that was going on for weeks, basically coinciding exactly with when I noticed her movements changing at the end of the pregnancy. Around 37 weeks, mm-hmm. I had started noticing her movements slowing, being weaker, brought it up to the doctor at several appointments, and was told, the classic old wives tale, oh, she's just running out of room, saving up energy for birth. This is normal. It is not normal. Again, I found out the evidence later, but that is just a very, very persistent old wives tale. And so, yes, her cord was getting compressed. And what was happening was that it was basically like stepping on a garden hose. A cord would get compressed, it would build up, the pressure would build until finally it would burst through. And what she actually died of was fetal maternal hemorrhage, of bleeding out into her placenta. And you could see on the slides from the placenta these striations from where it bled and then it stopped, and it bled and it stopped, hundreds of them. hundreds of episodes of cord compression over the last few weeks of her pregnancy. Yeah, and so that is it is the lack of oxygen and nutrients is what ended up causing her death. But it was not a one time I happened to be laying in the wrong position or something at night and it happened. This was going on, and there were many opportunities that we could have intervened. And that was both relieving because I had carried so much guilt. You know, the research had come out in the intervening years, showing that moms who lay on their back in the third trimester are 2 to 8 times as likely to have a stillbirth. And this is, again, laying on your back does not cause a stillbirth, but if, like Alana, you have a baby who is quietly vulnerable because they have something else going on in there, like a bad cord or placental issues, your blood pressure naturally drops at night. If you're laying on your back, your blood pressure naturally drops. And so it just becomes a perfect storm of factors. And if you're laying on your side, that is less likely to happen. And so, of course, I laid on my back every night, the entire pregnancy. The last night of her life, I actually was laying on my back for an hour. The last time I felt her moving, where I felt odd movements, different movements, things that I'd never felt before. But again, it was my first pregnancy. I didn't know. I just thought, oh, this must be Braxton Hicks contractions. Again, later was able to piece together that was her, those were her reflexes as a last ditch effort to try to move herself off of the cord or whatever was going on in there. When I finally got the answers that I did, it both relieved a lot of personal guilt that I had put on myself, blame for not knowing because of the lack of answers, from our medical system, that just gets compounded because everyone can say is, well, a healthy baby doesn't just die for no reason. But they're telling me that she was healthy. They're telling me that I was healthy. They're telling me that they followed all the things they were supposed to do. So what's left to blame? I must have done something wrong. And you will hear that story over and over again from basically every parent who has a stillbirth. And so
I would say that happens with every parent, almost every parent with child loss, that they blame themselves.
Blame themselves, exactly. And so in addition to relieving, that the weight of that guilt off my shoulders, the other thing getting those answers did for me was just really, really enraged me because it was very clear to me that even though the doctors were following standard protocols, that there was warning sign after warning sign after warning sign that either I was not educated about or I noticed, brought up, and was dismissed. And there were just things that could have been done that weren't done. And this was particularly obvious after I went through 2 more pregnancies when I was all of a sudden considered high risk, even though, again, like Alana, throughout the whole pregnancy, everything was absolutely perfect. And the level of care that I received in those pregnancies was just a world away from what I had gotten with Alana. And the whole pregnancy, all I could think was, why did I have to pay for this with my child's life? Why does every pregnancy not receive the best possible care? Why was I just assumed to be low risk through the whole time? The last detailed ultrasound I had with Alana was at 20 weeks. That's halfway through the pregnancy. Another 4 months without a detailed ultrasound. With my son and my daughter, they were having growth scans every 4 weeks. By the end of the pregnancy, I was getting monitoring through ultrasound or electronic fetal monitoring, NSTs, 2-3 times a week. They were watching them extremely closely. I was able, if I wanted to choose to have an elective induction to make sure that they got here safely, as soon as it was safe to deliver. It was just so unfair. It was so unfair that no one did this for my daughter or for any of the other, at this point, hundreds, thousands of babies that I knew. And meanwhile, all of us moms are sitting there thinking, why didn't I know this? Why didn't I know that? Why didn't I do these things, and blaming ourselves. And finally it just clicked for me. Like, if we're all making the same quote unquote mistakes, this is not the failure of any one parent. Like, this is a system level failure. And we're not failing our children. The entire system is failing us. And that was kind of where what led me into doing stillbirth prevention advocacy with Push.
Yes, clearly has fueled your life's work. And
Yeah.
and I want to talk more about that. A couple of questions I have for you is, one is like, what was it like to prepare the nursery and buy the car seat and all the things to welcome your newborn, only to come home empty-handed, and planning a funeral? I mean, that must have been so difficult. And how do you unannounce your pregnancy with all the people that you shared it with?
Those were some of the hardest things, honestly, because, my husband always describes it as this roller coaster. Like, you're going in, you think it's going to be the happiest day of your life, and then it becomes the worst. And yeah, she had 2 showers. She had a fully decorated nursery. Again, I had just released my 2nd book, so I was on a blog tour. So not only did all of our friends and family know about the pregnancy, but I had been shouting about it all over the internet as I'm getting interviewed for my book. Yeah, I just remember, like, while I was at home that last day and laboring with her, we hadn't really bought clothes for her. Everyone had bought, we were showered with tons of stuff. And I remember, like, that last week looking at her clothes and being like, I don't really love any of this stuff. There was lots of cute things, but there's a lot of pink. And for some reason, I just, like, didn't feel like she was a pink girl. I had in my head purple. She had purple in her room, lavender and stuff, and like that minty green color was popular at the time. But everybody had bought us pink stuff, and I was just like, I got to get something else that I really like to bring her home in from the hospital and for her newborn photos and stuff. And so that last week of the pregnancy, I went nuts, like ordering things and paying extra for the shipping to make sure they would get here in time. And, there were a couple of, like, kind of ridiculous splurges. Like, I bought, there was like a tiny little cashmere sweater. I'm like, no newborn needs a cashmere sweater, but, like, I don't know. I just felt compelled to do these things. And so I did. And of course they get here and they're all hand wash only. So I'm in labor, hand washing the clothes for her. And I remember, I set up a drying rack in our sunroom and put all the clothes on. I was like, well, they didn't get here in time to bring them home from the hospital in them, but they will be perfect for her newborn photos when we get back. And then 24 hours later, we get back from the hospital, and I walk into the room, into the house, and there's the rack of tiny baby clothes that I ended up burying her in.
And when does your grief start? I'm very curious to know, people who experience this, when did your grief start? Because I'm hearing you say it was sudden when you were planning to deliver, you're dealing with the death of your child. But then you find out years later what caused the death of your child. So you had to have had grief all over again years later.
All over again. That's just been, again, one of the hardest parts, I think, about a stillbirth is that you have so few memories to hold on to with your child. And then the time that they're actually in your arms, you're so in shock that you can't process anything. Even when you're surrounded by people like the nurses that I had who were giving me all the right advice, it's so hard to know to take it. Especially if this is something you never even heard of happening before, because it seems macabre, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you don't think, like, I want pictures of me with my dead child at the time. But now I would give anything to go back and be able to have spent more time, taking nice photos with her instead of, like, these ones on, again, it was 2013. Camera phones were not what they are today. Like, the pictures that I have of her were terrible. I mean, thankfully, again, I found people online who would Photoshop them, to make it look how she looked in person, because the images didn't come out representative of how beautiful and perfect she was. And I wanted to be able to share those. And so, yeah, like, you're in shock for weeks. Though they say the worst of the grief really is until 4-6 months out. because that's the point at which it really hits you, like, this is your life and everyone around you has moved on, and everyone just thinks, oh, don't worry, you'll have another baby and everything will be fine. That was the point at which I'm, again thinking, well, once I get pregnant again, things will be better. And then you're pregnant again, and you find out things are actually way, way worse. You don't really know what it is you're missing until you have a living child. So for many parents, when their subsequent child is born, they grieve all, like, they huge, huge wave of grief, because you finally really get it. Before you lost the idea of your child. And then you understand what it's like to actually lose a child. And yeah, and then all those milestones, her 5th birthday, that when school started, seeing that bus go by without her on it, I mean, that was one of the worst days of my life. And last year was her 10th birthday. We just got through my son's 10th birthday. Actually, yesterday was his birthday party. Yeah, I mean, it just, like, it doesn't go away. You learn how to carry it. I mean, as you guys know, right? This is grief, right? It is completely overwhelming at first, and you're raw, and everything just hurts. Like, I remember one time when I was probably 7 months out. I just went in the closet to put something away, and I banged into something, and I turned around, and it was all the little tiny hangers. I'm just like I just was sobbing on the floor. And yeah, it's just, there's so many triggers. I couldn't go to the mailbox. Every time I went to the mailbox, there was stuff for, oh, your baby's 6 months now. Do you want to get photos? Like, here's the catalog for new baby clothes. And I would page through those catalogs and just look at the clothes that she would have been in and just cry, like, oh God, it's just so many things. It's just so many things.
We totally understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, it's really tough. And yeah, and the logistics part of it was just a nightmare. So again, this was not probably common back in 2013. I think more people do it now. But because we had been so vocal about the pregnancy, like, we needed to tell so many people that she was gone. And I didn't know I didn't want to have to make all those phone calls or, so we ended up actually sending out a birth announcement. We sent out a birth announcement, and we said there was this book that they had sent us home from the hospital with, called we were supposed to have a baby, but we had an angel instead. And so I think I stole that, put it on the thing with, a couple of beautiful pictures that we had of her, and we just very briefly said what happened and sent it out. I also posted on Facebook. I posted a digital version of it on Facebook, and I published her full birth story on my blog, which had all the details. And this was about probably four weeks after she was born. And, I just felt at that time, like, if my story can help one person out there feel less alone, and better yet, if my story can prevent one family from going through what we have been through, like, it's worth putting myself out there. And so, and I did it. And so we did it. And, I'm really glad that we did. I know our friends and family really appreciate it, because I remember one of our friends saying to me, I had so many questions that I wouldn't have felt comfortable asking you, which you answered all of them in your birth story. And it was nice because we gave us an opportunity to say, hey, we want to talk about her. Like, this is not going to be a big secret. Like, she's going to be part of our family, and please talk about her. I don't want anyone to have to carry the what ifs that we do, and that so many other stillbirth families do. We know we can't prevent every stillbirth, but every family who goes through this deserves to know that they and the providers did everything possible. And unfortunately, no families in the U.S. can say that right now. And also for anyone who does go on to lose a child, to know that it's normal, things like taking pictures and making sure you get something that touched your baby's skin before you leave the hospital. Like, these are good and healthy things to do. And unless that's kind of like planted in the back of your brain, you can't process that in the moment. And so my hope was that by putting our story out there, we would prevent other people from having the regrets that we did. Hopefully, in being able to keep their child alive, and if not, at least being able to know they made all the memories that they had the opportunity to at that time.
Samantha, I'm just curious because technically I am a sibling who has experienced two losses in some ways because my mother suffered a miscarriage as well before Cassidy was born. And sometimes I imagine as a young child, I might have been almost insensitive to how normal it was for my mother to mention what would have been Kennedy. She even told me as a kid that if I was a girl, I would have been named Kennedy instead of Colby. How do you go about expressing your relationship with Alana to your children, and how do you, go about keeping her spirit and who she was alive to them?
Yeah. I mean, that was something that I had so much anxiety about before my subsequent kids were born. I read a lot of research about, what it's like for subsequent children. I was so worried that Alana's death would be this dark cloud that hung over our family forever. And what I learned is that if you just talk about it like it's normal, like you said, like you didn't appreciate it because you didn't know,
Right.
but it's in the families, that where it's a dark secret that kids find out later, or there's lots of questions, where things can become messier. And so for us, we just leaned into it. We just leaned into, this is your sister. She died before you were born. And just, there's always pieces of her around the house, photos and, her toys. Like, it was important to me that, her stuff gets passed down to her siblings the same way that it would have if she was here. Because we were so vocal about our loss in the beginning and very quickly got into advocacy and stuff, she's always been an active part of our family. And so it's been, I think, probably easier for us than others to, that it really is just a part of our everyday life. And, at first I was very, very deliberate about it. Like, we would do things like we would light a candle for her dinner every night. And, of course we have like her stocking and her, ornaments in the tree, and we go to decorate her grave for Halloween and Easter and all the big holidays, and her birthday, of course. And when the kids were little, I felt like I really needed to be very intentional about what we did. All they see is the love. Like, yeah, we love your sister the same way we love you. And if you died tomorrow, we would continue to keep you a part of our family as well. And we would talk about you, and we would show our love for you, and we would do whatever we can to honor you. And, that's all we're doing with her. Like, this is how someone's a part of our family.
So soon after, you decided to unite with other bereaved parents, and you found the nonprofit organization called Push for Empower Pregnancy. So what is your organization doing? What are you pushing for? What is it you want to change?
Yeah. So the main thing we want to change is we want the standard of care to be better, higher for all pregnancies. We want to see, so what we've seen done in other countries. And again, this is very recent. So for a long time, doctors would say, oh, there's nothing you can do about stillbirth, and that was it. But then we saw in Australia and the UK, they came out with these bundles, kind of like we're seeing starting to see now for maternal mortality in this country, of like simple, like 5-step changes to protocols. Things like having a standard education for parents about fetal movement, and a standard way that doctors and nurses, or whoever's taking the call when you call in to report a change, is evaluating that. Because right now it all depends who picks up the phone and whether they believe those misconceptions or not. Things like doing a standard third trimester ultrasound. Again, like Alana if she had been being measured the way that my other kids were, we would have seen that she dropped off her growth chart those last couple of weeks of the pregnancy. She had been, consistently 80th percentile, and then all of a sudden she was only 50th. And again, she's 6.5 pounds. It's not a small baby. But her brother and sister, who were delivered, 2.5 weeks earlier than her, were both over 8 pounds at birth. Like, she should have been bigger than she was. It was because she stopped growing. And that's something that could have been caught in ultrasound and wasn't, because nobody was looking. Australia, again, one of the simple things in Australia, because is the sleeping on your side thing, making sure that parents know to fall asleep on your side in the third trimester. Like, none of these things are rocket science, and none of them alone are going to prevent every stillbirth. But if you do enough of these simple things, it adds up and it makes a difference. And so what they saw in the UK and Australia is immediate 20 to 30% drops in the stillbirth rates in participating hospital units. And, they started at the same place that we are now. And that's something, again, that many people don't realize, is that the United States, when it comes to stillbirth, is shamefully behind our international peers. So we rank 48th out of 49 high-income countries in our average rate of reduction of stillbirth, and 183rd out of all 195 low, middle, and high-income countries worldwide who report stillbirth rates. So as PUSH, our mission, we focus on a few things. Number one is awareness, because you cannot fix a problem that you refuse to name. And again, parents have no idea that this is going on until it happens to them or someone they love. And providers even don't understand the scale of the problem. The average doctor sees 1 or 2 stillbirths a year. And it just is one of those terrible things. And, it just is what it is to them. But they're always shocked to learn that it's actually 1 in 170 pregnancies, which again sounds rare. It's less than 1%, right? But if you take a step back and you look at childhood causes of death reported by CDC, stillbirth actually claims more American children's lives each year up to age 14 than prematurity, SIDS, car accidents, drowning, guns, fire, poison, flu, and listeria combined. And those are all things that parents are warned about. The difference is, again, with stillbirth, you're not finding out anything about it until it's already too late. And so, yeah, it's shockingly common. 65 families every day. So that's a school bus, a big school bus, or 3 average U.S. kindergarten classes every single day in this country. But because there's been such a stigma, and because there has been this misconception, there's nothing we can do about it, no one has bothered to raise awareness of it. And so our number one job is to elevate this cause and this issue into the national consciousness. And what we're really pushing for, again, is because of what we've seen with ACOG and the incentives and how our system is set up, top-down change. We need the highest echelons of medicine and public health in this country to make stillbirth a priority. And so we do things like, we do advocacy, federal on the Hill. We go and we've been helping. There's been several partner orgs with bills and stuff that we've been working on. One of those resulted in the NIH, National Institutes of Health, creating a stillbirth working group for the first time in over a decade. And when those sessions are held publicly, and so as we're watching them as parents, we're realizing, like, they don't seem to know what's going on in other countries. Like, these are our experts, but they're naming things like obesity and smoking, like, as the main causes of stillbirth. But meanwhile, 80% of stillbirths are taking place in otherwise healthy, low-risk pregnancies. 80% of moms who go on a stillbirth have 0 known maternal risk factors at the start of the pregnancy. Most stillbirths are just happening to anyone and everyone. And so, and the other thing too is that, like maternal mortality, we see is that Black moms, Indigenous moms, basically anybody from marginalized background are, at twice the risk of having a stillbirth. And it's not due to any fault of their own. And in many cases, it's not even due to social determinants of health and things like access to care and stuff. For Black moms in particular, at least half of Black stillbirths can be explained, cannot be explained by social determinants of health, which means it's systemic racism, implicit bias in healthcare providers, and then structural racism factors that are the cause of that. And so, and that was another thing, was that the NIH working group, they were bringing in experts and stuff, but there was no one who was a person of color. There was very few voices from parents with lived experience. And, certainly they were not hearing from, parents of color who, again, are bearing the brunt of this burden. And so we did a lot of grassroots advocacy to try to make those sessions, number one, more accessible to a more diverse range of families. And basically we annoyed them enough that they added a fourth session onto their agenda, specifically designed to be a listening session where anybody could sign up for 3 minutes to speak. And so we signed up for as many slots as we could get. And then we reached out to all of our friends across the loss community, and particularly, Black moms and others from marginalized backgrounds whose voices don't get heard often enough. And we put them first. We just rearranged our slots and told NIH, I hope you don't mind, but we're going in this order, if that's okay. And made sure that those stories that desperately need to be heard by people who have the power to create change are getting heard. And so that was a huge success, actually. So when they started that working group, we were very upset because the mandate for it, like the stated goals, did not mention the word prevention at all. And several of us reached out right away and was like, did you guys forget something? And they're like, oh, no, this is what Congress tells us we have to do. And that was very concerning, obviously. And by the end of it, when the report came out, from the session had the word prevention in it 90 times. And the second round, the second round of the of this working group, which just ended a couple months ago, they actually created an entire prevention subcommittee that's specifically focused on that. And so that was a huge success, because that NIH group now has, it's documented all over the place that National Institute of Health says that stillbirth is a serious problem and we need to be doing more to prevent it. And so that is incredibly helpful, because now the CDC is looking at doing stuff, and, we can go to the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine and to ACOG and say, it's time to get on board and do something about this. So that's what we call education, our education part of things we do. Advocacy for public health and government officials and stuff. And then also education in terms of like training. Again, this is not part of something that people are learning right now in medical school. So we have pregnancy after loss training, which is, again, designed to teach providers to be in the shoes of patients going through a subsequent pregnancy after a previous stillbirth or other loss. And even though that's not a huge proportion of stillbirths, numbers wise, it's not gonna move the needle in terms of the overall number. Our hope is we're playing a little inception here. Our hope is that we can change the culture from within. No family, no provider wants to go through stillbirth, of course, and they especially don't want to go through a second stillbirth with a family who's it's happened to. And so it's an easy sell. It's an easy sell to say, hey, we can give you training to, number one, and also pregnant after lost parents we're not easy patients. We know how to advocate for ourselves, and we understand the stakes, and we drive our providers absolutely freaking nuts. As we should, because we deserve that, and everyone deserves that. But so this is basically designed to make this process easier on all involved, And so the doctors are into it. But the main message coming out of the training is you got to treat every pregnancy as an individual. You know, these one size fits all rules don't work. You got to listen, you got to partner with your patient. And our hope is that, you know, that attitude doesn't just go away when you go into your next appointment with your next patient who is not a lost parent. You know, that it's training medical professionals to really listen. And, you know, again, this is something that will improve outcomes, not just for stillbirth, but across the board. I mean, this is one of the number one things with maternal mortality and morbidity, right? Like moms feel like they're not being heard and they're getting, you know, pushed into situations that are not safe. Um, and so, yeah, all of these things is share a lot of root causes. And so that's one of the other areas we do. And then, of course, in the meantime, because top-down systemic change takes time, we don't have time with 65 babies dying, potentially preventable deaths every day. You know, we do a lot of grassroots outreach directly to parents to try to equip them with the information that we wish somebody had given us. So basically, all of that evidence-based stuff that we're seeing be successful in other countries, all of the small things that are within your power to change, and the things that you need to know to ask your doctor about. We are just trying through social media, through our website, through getting in the news as much as possible. You know, that's something again we really push for. Is we do a lot of media because it's the most effective way to reach as many people as possible.
You're clearly passionate about what you do. You're educated. You're experienced. You know, you can feel that. And we want to tell our listeners that they can get more information at pushpregnancy.org. People want to become involved, learn more, become part of your advocacy. So we would certainly recommend people to do that.
Yes, please go to our website. On all of our empowered pregnancy information is always free. So everything is up there. We link directly to the sources so that you can see for yourself. And again, we're not medical providers. We're just parents like you. But we're sharing the things we wish somebody had given us that might have made a difference for us.
That's great. We just aired a podcast in October, actually, this year about what I had learned about grief in the last 10 years since we lost Cassidy. And so I want to ask you, what do you think you've learned about your own grief in the last 11 years that maybe you didn't know?
Yeah. I always say that I cannot believe how much good has come into our life as a result of Alana's life and unfortunately death. But at the time of her loss, I could not imagine that ever anything good could come out of this. You know, it was just, everything was horrible. And of course I would always choose to have my daughter here over any of the, you know, other things that came after. But the people that I have met through surviving what we've survived, and the way that our kids' lives have been able to create change, lasting change, is really helping other people. I could not have envisioned it. And so I think the number one thing that I've learned about grief is that as much as those platitudes that no one wants to hear about everything happening for a reason, and you know, you're gonna do something good with this, and you know, look on the bright, like no one wants to hear that, but they persist because eventually, some point down the road, some of it is a little bit true. And I'm just like, when I think of my daughter now, of course I miss her. I would much rather have her here, having her birthday party like we just did with my son. But the thing I feel most is gratitude. I'm just so grateful that she was part of our life, that she was mine. I wouldn't choose another child. I wouldn't choose not to have her. She has changed everything about our lives, and much of it for the better. And I could not have imagined that was possible, but that's been my experience.
So at the end of our podcast, Samantha, we ask our guests and give them the opportunity to answer a very important question. How would you like the world to remember your baby, Alana?
Oh, I love that question. I want the world to remember Alana as a fiery spirit, as someone who came here to shake things up and create change and create good, create lasting good on this planet. She never got to do it her own way, but my hope is that through push and through the work that we do, that we are doing what she would have wanted us to do.
Well, thank you for being a voice for all moms out there who are living with this unbearable pain of child loss, and especially to Stillborn, and for being such a courageous advocate for future moms and their babies still to be born.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, please share our link with others and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Monica Charette, reminding you that you are never alone in your grief. Until next time, we'll be right here with you, holding the light.
As long as you love, as long as you love.